Hi, shalom from Israel. Um, it's always been my dream to follow the financials, and I assume that some of you had lunch, so I've got an even double challenge to try and keep you excited and awake at this time. So I'll do my best. The other thing I was thinking of is, and I see that out of the 110 participants, I think the vast majority, as should be in World WIZO or the federations of WIZO, are women. And so it made me remember an occasion a number of years ago when I was in Washington, D.C. for a program called The Lion of Judah. And many of you, I think, know of the Lion of Judah. And the speaker at that time was Hillary Clinton. She was making this wonderful speech in Washington, but unfortunately, the week before the speech, all of the scandals regarding her and her husband came out, and I would say that the newspapers were covered with some of the less pleasant dealings in her family. But in any case, she didn't cancel, and she came to the event, and I really wanted to go and hear Hillary Clinton, so I went, and I was in this very, very large auditorium with 1,000 women and myself, and maybe a couple of security guards. And then she was just incredible. She actually started up saying, before we're world leaders, we have to take care of our own homes and our own daughters. And it was a really wonderful speech. But at the end, I just couldn't miss the opportunity to say hi to Hillary Clinton. So I walked down the aisle with everybody else, and there were a whole lot of people there. And eventually I got my turn, and I said, Mrs. Clinton, I just wanted to tell you how impressive it was and how courageous I think you are for everything you said in this speech. And she said, I'm courageous. You're so courageous for being here with 1,000 women. So here I am again, and I'm really delighted to be here. I don't know you. I think some of you, and I certainly know Danny. And by the way, it was mentioned I was born in Scotland. My mother is a member of WIZO and has been for many years, and so she's one of the 250,000. And a very proud member of WIZO. And of course, we don't forget that the origins of World WIZO were in Great Britain, although not in Scotland, but it's pretty close by. And so I feel very close to your incredible organization. But because I don't know, I was trying to think about the lives that you're living in this current reality, and what challenge it is for you to get up every day and work on behalf of WIZO. So bear with me, and if I get this right, then I'm delighted. If I don't, then excuse me. But I imagine each and every one of you, whether you're lay volunteer leaders or you're professionals for WIZO, waking up in the morning and knowing that you have a big day ahead because you're going to be meeting some people and you want to tell them the story of WIZO and get them excited about what WIZO does in Israel on behalf of the Jewish people. And it could be, you could be waking up in Santiago, or you could be waking up in Brussels or in London, or many of the other countries that you all live in. And as you get up in the morning, you're having your coffee and you're thinking about the presentation that you're going to meet with the people that you're about to meet, about how what WIZO does in Israel for women, and for women's rights, and what it's done for so many years. And you want to talk about the importance of empowering teenage girls, and you want to talk about supporting at-risk families, and WIZO's work in daycare centers. And I was listening to the presentation before. That's something that I was involved in for many years in WIZO's daycare centers, and they are incredibly important for the state of Israel. And you want to talk about women's shelters and youth at risk and special needs, and all of the incredible things that WIZO does. And as you're having your coffee, you take the newspaper, the morning newspaper, and again, it's the morning newspaper in Brussels or in San Diego or in Buenos Aires or wherever you're living. And you look on the front page of this paper as you're getting excited and psyched up for your day, and you read the local news. And the local news is talking about issues in your community, in your country. And they're talking about the pandemic and how many people are still suffering, how many new cases there have been. And they're talking about unemployment related to the pandemic, and how the hospitals are overflowing, and all of the issues that have erupted throughout the world with violence, domestic violence, as a result of being locked up and everything that's happening in the world. And so you're getting a little bit uneasy because you're thinking about your mandate of telling the story of WIZO in Israel, and then but this reality is that's one that's on the front page of your newspaper. And so you flip the newspaper, and then you get to page 3, and page 3 is the foreign news, and it's talking about Israel. And it's talking about the fact that there's issues in Israel. On the one hand, there's an article about the conflict with the Palestinians. It could be that we've just finished a little mini war like we did a few weeks ago. But then your newspaper is not reporting like the Jerusalem Post would. Your newspaper is reporting about the poor Palestinians who suffered as a result of Israel's aggression, as it would be said. And then the second paragraph is about the political unrest in Israel, how for so many months and years it's taken to put a government together, and some of the cynicism about the stability or the lack of stability in the Israeli political system. And then you read further, and just at the very bottom, there's another article which relates to Israel, but it's about some incredible startup that was developed in Israel. It's an iPhone app that's just been sold for hundreds of millions of dollars. And you say to myself, Gewalt, how can I take the front page of my newspaper and the third page and go and talk to these people about the things that I want to talk about? So I don't know if this is the reality of what you're facing on the day. It may be, and it may be a lot easier than I'm describing, or maybe a lot more difficult. But bear with me if this is reality. I wanted to give you a couple of thoughts that I was thinking about as I was preparing for your organization for this meeting. The first thing is to stop and take a deep breath and take a sip of that coffee, or maybe a sip of water, and say, here we are in 2021, 101 years since the founding of WIZO. Let's try and look at with perspective on the history of where we were as a Jewish people, what was happening in the state of Israel 101 years ago, and where we are today. So in 1920, when WIZO was being formed in London, as you all know a whole lot better than I do, there was no state of Israel. It was pre-Holocaust. There was anti-Semitic attacks throughout the world, pogroms, and nobody's protect the Jewish people. There was the beginning of an idea that had been 20, 30 years in the making of a startup of creating a state in Israel, but in 1920, who believed that was possible? It was an idea in some crazy dreamers' ideas. And then 20 years later, of course, the greatest horror in the history of the Jewish people would occur with the Holocaust. And now look where we are today in 2021, and what we've done, and what you've done as this very incredible organization over 101 years. And the problems that we're dealing with in Israel today, as difficult as they may be, as complex as they may be, we have to stop and say, look at the historical perspective. Where have we been? Where were we 101 years ago? And where are we today? That should stop and say, I see the big picture. The second thing I wanted to mention as far as that's concerned is the fact that not just WIZO, worldwide WIZO, but all of the organizations that make up the Jewish community, the global Jewish community, and as I mentioned before, I've been connected to many of the large organizations, but particularly from a WIZO perspective, what you have created is nothing less than a global, worldwide collaboration, conglomerate. You know, we look at these big firms, these big companies that have these multinationals they may be based in Seattle, but they've got a branch here and a branch there and all the rest of it, and say, oh my goodness, we are 250,000 strong army of women in tens of countries throughout the world, working together on a common purpose with an incredibly, and I just heard your financials, incredibly modest overhead, because our organization is built on motivation and love and caring and dedication to try and take what you've created in WIZO over 101 years and replicate it is absolutely impossible. And so the second thing I want you to think as you're trying to figure out how you're going to get through this meeting and succeed in your goals is you belong to something absolutely incredible. I don't know of any other example anywhere in the world of what we as a Jewish people have, and in you particular have in WIZO. The fact that I can mention my mother as a member of WIZO in Glasgow, Scotland, and she's there. By the way, she's not on this call, which is so she's probably the only one who would care about listening to my bio. But she and another 249,990 people are being represented by you, and it's incredible. That's a network that is scary in its proportions how incredible it is. And that's the second thing of perspective that I wanted to think about. The other thing that is that, and it comes very connected to that, is your relationship with the state of Israel, because not only are you part of this multinational conglomerate in tens of countries with 250,000 members, you all are shareholders, stakeholders in a startup, which is called the State of Israel. And everything you do for the State of Israel, whether it's raising another dollar or euro, wherever for a daycare center or for a women's shelter, is you investing in a corporation of which you have shares, you have a stake. And that's an incredibly powerful concept to think of. So that you are owners. You may not, that I heard the conversation about who owns the daycare centers. It doesn't really matter whose name's on the deed, but symbolically, morally, and conceptually, you are shareholders, stakeholders in this incredible venture, startup venture called the State of Israel. And that's a very powerful tool to have. The other thing that I wanted to say is about the type of activities that you're involved in, and this relates to my comment about us. You know, you're reading about this Israeli who's made hundreds of $millions in an exit of the sale of a high-tech company. We in Israel, we have wealth. You know it. You've all visited here, and you know that some of us, not me, but some of us drive fancy cars and live in fancy houses, and there is wealth in the country, and that's part of the success that you've all contributed to, because so many of these people attended a WIZO facility at one point in their life. But we also know the gaps in Israeli society, and we know that this is one of the most concerning things that keeps us up at night: the gaps between the haves and the have-nots. And what you're doing in all of the activities that you choose to do as an organization is to feed into closing that gap. Because as strong as we are as a nation, we're only as strong as the weakest link in that chain. And so what you're doing is strategic. You're helping Israel keep its volatility, its strength, and its ability to be who we are by understanding that somebody's got to take care of that weakest link. So what you do is strategic in importance, even if, and I know you raise tremendous amounts of money, but if you compare it to Israel's budget, it's not a lot, but what you choose to do with the money is strategic. And the second to last thing that I wanted to say is that, and I know this is very much part of what you do, and when I look through the names, I see there's plenty of Israelis here, and is that you have managed to build a partnership with Israelis, and that partnership allows you to do good things together, whether it's funding that women's shelter or running the youth village or building the daycare center. But it's much more than that. What you're doing is you're building this link between Israel and diaspora, which is not based on ignorance, and it's not based on having different languages. It's based on a common purpose. And so building that strategic link, I think that with our new administration here in Israel, particularly our new president, Herzog, we're going to have a lot more conversation about the bonds between us and how Israel and the diaspora come together and have dialogue and discuss our differences, but also have joint projects together. So that's an incredibly important and powerful part of what you do, because it's Jewish women in the communities throughout Israel and Israeli women coming together that is something, again, which is a valuable asset. And the last thing that I wanted to say is something that you all know, and probably, I assume on the call there are many people who would identify with this statement. It's not easy being Jewish in the diaspora at all. It probably was never easy, but for those generations today, those who are in their 30s or their 20s, it's not entirely clear that a Jewish identity is a given. It's not like the generation of our parents or grandparents, where being Jewish was something that defined our every single waking moment. For our children, our grandchildren living in the diaspora, there's a challenge. There's a question of why be Jewish, and if I'm not Orthodox, I'm not observant, then how do I stay connected, etc. And what you do with every young woman that you bring aboard WIZO and you sign them up, or what you're actually saying to that person is, it's not about the money. It's not even about everything I mentioned before of the impact in Israel. You're helping that young Jewish woman develop an identity which allows her to stay connected to the Jewish people. And of course, there's a ripple effect, because her husband is aware of that as well, and her children. So that job that WIZO is doing isn't just doing everything that I said for the state of Israel. You're actually having an impact on the future of the Jewish people by giving young Jewish women the ability to connect to their Judaism or the Jewish identity via an organization. So I don't know if you've been able to relate to what I'm saying, but if so, and tomorrow morning or any other morning, and you get up and you have the struggle of how do I do my job as a professional or as a lay volunteer, I hope that I've been able to contribute to some of your thoughts and help you do that incredible job.